The timer for cross-ex for 3 minutes. My time starts now. What are lethal autonomous weapon systems?
Lethal autonomous weapon systems are weapon systems that can target and lock onto a target for attack. Now, I want to make a distinction here. Fully lethal autonomous weapon systems are weapon systems that can target, lock, and kill their target without any need for human interaction. That is what is addressed by our plan here. However, there's also a separate category of semi-autonomous lethal weapons, which can target and lock on to targets, but still need human interaction to actually fire.
Okay. What is the greatest threat that lethal autonomous weapons pose?
The greatest threat that lethal autonomous weapons pose?
Yeah, what's your greatest concern?
The greatest concern is that the lethal autonomous weapon systems, despite any good intentions that its creators may have, may actually cause civilian casualties and essentially hold innocent people's lives in the balance.
What examples do you have of civilian casualties occurring at the hands of lethal autonomous weapons?
So if you go over to our lack of de-escalation evidence from Yuna Hu Wang at the RAND Corporation, it states that we've already seen an empirical example of the Phalanx anti-missile system, a lethal autonomous weapon, that has accidentally fired on U.S. ships and aircrafts that are in ways that were not anticipated by the human operators, killing U.S. servicemen in the process.
Okay.
And these are just weapons that are in development. One could only imagine the scale and scope that these errors could have if they were deployed fully autonomous lethal weapons in battle.
All right. What countries are developing laws?
Lethal autonomous weapon systems are being developed by countries such as the United States and a couple of other countries such as the United Kingdom, Australia, and such.
So countries within NATO are developing laws, correct?
That is correct.
Are countries like Russia and China developing laws?
Those countries are putting some funding towards developing lethal autonomous weapons. That is correct.
Okay. What efforts have there been made in the past, or have there been any efforts in the past to ban laws?
There have been efforts in the past to ban laws, most recently a couple of years ago, but that sort of ban was killed essentially by countries such as the United States, which has been compromised by our inherency evidence as shown in our 1AC through lobbying. Those sorts of efforts have been stymied by the United States itself. That's why passing this plan for the United States to ban lethal autonomous weapons would cause the global community to reshift.
All right, I have no further questions. Thank you. I'll be taking 1 minute or 30 seconds of prep time just to reorient myself before my next speech. Okay. All right. Before my next speech for the first negative constructive, I will be addressing the 3 stock issues of harms, solvency, and disadvantage. My timer for 5 minutes starts now. When looking at future wars, it's necessary that we work to stay ahead of our adversaries. Lethal autonomous weapon systems have the capability of being utilized strategically by the United States military, eliminating the need for human soldiers on the battlefield. They are being developed to be consistently reliable, and there are restrictions barring countries from deploying faulty weapons. Banning laws in their entirety would put the United States and NATO at a massive disadvantage, while countries like Russia and China are allowed to proliferate laws. Simply put, we cannot allow the United States to put itself at a disadvantage when looking forward into future wars. Now, moving to the stock issue of harms, where it is the affirmative's burden to prove that there are legitimate and concrete examples of lethal autonomous weapon systems slaughtering innocent civilians and having legitimate harms. They're wrong, and they failed to prove this. First, humans make irrational decisions and frequently violate international law. However, lethal autonomous weapons can follow a strict set of guidelines and ultimately save civilian lives. Rosa Brooks, professor of law at Georgetown University, writes on January 22, 2014, "Computers will be far better than human beings at complying with international humanitarian law. Humans are fantastically bad at distinguishing between combatants and civilians. Conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan produced a surfeit of dead civilians, because of fallible human decision making. Computers, in contrast, are excellent in crisis situations. Humans, not robots, came up with torture and crucifixion. Humans, not robots, came up with firebombing. Humans, not robots, planned the Holocaust. Robots will dutifully abide by laws of armed conflict to the best of their technological ability. As we continue to develop lethal autonomous weapon systems further and further, the small percentage of them acting out of turn and killing civilians will exponentially decrease as they continue to be developed. Humans are subject to making mistakes due to emotional fallibility, whereas lethal autonomous weapons are acting on algorithms and systems designed to allow them to make the best decisions. Next, move into the stock issue of solvency, whereas the affirmative's burden to prove that their plan is not only feasible, but will directly address their harms. Now first, convincing all 30 NATO members to cooperate on a single alliance-wide ban of lethal autonomous weapons would be impossible. Each member has different interests, goals, and visions for the future of lethal autonomous weapons, and some members are diametrically opposed to each other. Melissa Heikkila, writer for Politico, on August 30th, 2022, writes, "On paper, NATO is the ideal organization to set standards for military artificial intelligence. But the wildly divergent priorities and budgets of its 30 members could get in its way. NATO's members are at very different stages when it comes to AI in the military. The US has prioritized AI in the defense realm, but in Europe, most countries barely mention defense at all. There are divergences over what technologies the alliance ought to develop, including lethal autonomous weapons. Powerful NATO members, including France, the UK, and the US, have developed these technologies and opposed a treaty on these weapons, while Belgium and Germany have expressed serious concerns. Simply put, it would be nearly impossible to implement a ban with all 30 NATO countries fully agreeing on it and coming to a consensus. What the affirmative is arguing for is a hypothetical scenario in which every country sacrifices their own self-interest for the sake of a proposed treaty for weapons that don't actually have legitimate harms. Now, finally, moving to the stock issue of the disadvantage, whereas the affirmative's burden to prove that banning lethal autonomous weapons would do more good than harm. However, they're wrong, because lethal autonomous weapons, they're wrong because both Russia and China are heavily investing in lethal autonomous weapons systems to gain a military advantage over the United States in the future. Stephen Zaitchik, reporter for the Washington Post, writes on March 12, 2022, "Both military experts and peace activists say the future of war is autonomous weapons. Russia's machine gun manufacturer announced a gun with a neural network. The country have the potential to deploy loitering drones with various autonomous capabilities. Russia shows it's willing to use controversial weapons in Ukraine, and fully autonomous weapons won't be far behind. China's been pushing as well. The country has eclipsed America. China is believed to have made strides in military-grade facial recognition. Any effort to ban these things is futile. They convey too much of an advantage for states to argue that. The right rules around AI weapons would ease concerns while paying dividends." In short, what the affirmative is arguing for is a plan that does not properly address any concrete issues, one that would not pass within NATO due to the diverse priorities of all the member countries, and it would subject the US and NATO members to be put at a massive disadvantage, while countries like Russia and China continue to proliferate laws. For these reasons, my partner and I strongly negate the resolution. Thank you.
All right. Now we begin 3 minutes of cross-examination.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have your timer?
You got it.
All right. Tell me when to begin.
Tom, will start your first word. Just go ahead.
All right. Yeah. All right. So, yeah. So, in your harms section,
Yep.
Who programs? You mentioned the computers are not. You mentioned that humans, not computers, are the ones that cause such horrible things in history. But who programs those computers that cause such issues?
The humans develop these robots, but once activated, these robots are artificially intelligent, meaning that once activated, they act on algorithms that artificially correct themselves without the need for any human intervention. So while humans do put these into place, these lethal autonomous weapon systems act on their own, and they continue to be developed. They have to make mistakes and continue to develop themselves before being implemented. So in short, though they are activated by humans, they learn from their own mistakes, and they're developed to avoid making any egregious errors.
But what if what we call mistakes are actually what is intended by the person using said lethal autonomous weapon? In other words, each artificial intelligence program has an end goal. And if that end goal is something nefarious, then a lethal autonomous weapon with the sheer size and scale can inflict a lot of damage. So how is something that is programmed by a human going to cause less damage than the human itself?
In our harms evidence, the point we're trying to articulate here is that humans in high pressure situations are more likely to make legitimate and concrete errors that lead to war crimes due to emotional fallibility. What we're arguing is that lethal autonomous weapon systems lack that emotional conscience, and they're acting on algorithms, and they have been programmed particularly to identify certain targets. They're being used, think of them being used as scalpels with pinpoint precision to only be utilized in very specific scenarios. They are only acting on a very small set of exact circumstances to use lethal force, whereas armed humans, without any potential provocation, could willingly commit a war crime and be held accountable for it.
Okay, let's move on to your disadvantage section here.
Okay.
Now, remember, our plan advocates for the banning of fully lethal autonomous weapons, defined as weapons that can target, lock, and kill without human input.
Correct.
So what specific military edge or military advantage is brought from banning lethal autonomous weapons, fully lethal autonomous weapons, compared to just, leaving semi-autonomous weapons in place, which is something that would happen under the plan that we propose?
To keep this short and brief, banning them in their entirety would allow countries like Russia and China to implement them, which takes the need for human soldiers out of the equation in the battlefield. They can simply lay back, press a button, and send out massive hordes of lethal autonomous weapons out into the battlefield, which would give them an advantage since they wouldn't have to use any actual manpower. We're out of time.
But even the United States, if it has semi-autonomous lethal weapons, will not need any manpower on the field. All it will need is a human to authorize a robot to kill. So what is the military edge here?
The military edge is that it still needs a human to activate it and to actually lock on, whereas fully lethal autonomous weapons do not need the human to press the kill switch. We're out of time.
All right.
All right.
Okay. So, do you have your timer ready?
Yep, you got it.
All right. Warfare was changed for the worse with the introduction of lethal autonomous weapons. As we develop these weapons faster and make them fully autonomous, we're essentially letting a computer have free range over the life and death of a person. These computers are unreliable and dangerous, and only a ban can prevent such horrific circumstances from going from Terminator to reality. With that, let's transition to the stock issue of harms, where we'll show again how lethal autonomous weapon systems have the capability to cause significant damage to our world. The negative argues that civilian casualties will somehow be lowered through the use of lethal autonomous weapon systems, but that argument is simply false. According to the Roser evidence in our first speech, these machines may miss de-escalatory signals in war, missing the inherently human desire for peace. That could lead to prolonged conflict because robots will not be programmed through their algorithms for peace, something which the negative could not address in the preceding crossings. Not only that, the Phalanx anti-missile lethal autonomous weapon system has already malfunctioned and fired on U.S. ships, killing U.S. servicemen. One can only imagine their parents' shock and horror when they found out their sons and daughters dead at the hands of these weapons. But the reality is, it's only the tip of the iceberg of problems if this plan doesn't pass. Next, we'll move on to the stock issue of solvency, where we'll show that our plan solves for the harms lethal autonomous weapons pose. The negative argues that NATO is a diverse organization and not all of its members may be on the same page. But this argument is wrong. The US, for the lobbying reasons explained in inherency and explained in the cross-examination, is the major obstacle to progress currently. The US also has one of the most prominent roles in the international community, undoubtedly. So this proposal would send a message that the US is serious about saving human lives, and that would place huge pressures on countries in NATO, like the UK, to act as well. Let's finally transition to the stock issue of the disadvantage, where it's the negative's burden to prove that there are actually significant drawbacks to the plan. They argue that without lethal autonomous weapons, the US will not have a military edge that other countries would have. However, again, this argument is simply wrong. Without fully autonomous lethal weapon systems, the US would still have semi-autonomous weapons. Now let's get this straight. These have the exact same capabilities as lethal autonomous weapon systems fully. All they need is human input to authorize these lethal operations from going through. It is essentially the same military edge, but combined with the potential to cause unintended deaths, as outlined in our harms section, there's no reason why we should keep lethal autonomous weapons in place. In summary, it's absolutely essential that the United States ban fully lethal autonomous weapon systems for the good of the world itself. Countries came together decades ago to agree not to use nuclear weapons. And as we sit on the brink of a new revolution in warfare, we hold the lives of the people in the balance. Therefore, my partner and I strongly advocate for this ban.